G'day everyone, welcome to a new video guide. Today we're taking a look at Dwarven Might. This is a Mystic Echo Scoia'tael deck with a focus on dwarves, and just really uses the power of a lot of those Dwarven synergies and some of the more powerful patch changes to Scoia'tael cards such as Call of the Forest, the most recent update, to really just deliver a really powerful deck that can really just snowball in terms of points, and often if you get the correct game state, can just auto win your games against a lot of different decks. So we're going to run through the list here. I'm going to explain all the cards we've got and why they're in the deck, and the couple of flex spots that we have as well. And then we're going to go into two games, so we've got a win and a loss. I'm going to be voicing over that, explaining our plays, why I do certain things, and why it ended up how it did. So let's start the list, and we'll start at the bottom. So as you can tell, pretty much everything here is a dwarf. So at our bottom end, we've got a pretty classic dwarf package of Dwarven skirmishers, agitators, and guards, Markham guards. So these are all just solid bronzes. Agitators can boost either your defenders or Sheldon Skags, which is obviously a very classic Scoia'tael thing to do. Dwarven skirmishers are a lot nicer now that they don't have any reach requirements, so it's a pretty consistent 5 points. And Markham guards can often just be crazy. There's pretty common times where you're just going to have 3, 4, 5, 6 dwarves in one row. So playing a Markham guard, you're getting upwards of 7, 8, 9 points even on a full provision card, which is crazy. And you can have 2 of those. So these can be some super late game powerhouses, or they're just solid, early game cards. A couple of dwarves goes for 5, 3 dwarves goes for 6. So that's fairly good. Also got the Dwarven Mercenaries. Now these guys can just win you games. So if you've got first say on round 3, and it's a fairly long round, they work better in longer rounds, you can play 4 of these as the first play of round 3, and often that's just too much for really any opponent to deal with, and you just snowball because they get 1 charge whenever you play a dwarf. And almost every card in this deck is a dwarf. So if you've got 4 of these on the field, each card you're playing is essentially dealing 4 damage, providing you've got all of them on board. It's just unstoppable, really. That's obviously via Novigradian Justice. So those are super key to the deck. Very often a round 3 play that'll just win you games. It can be pretty brutal. Sometimes I feel bad because it can be so crazy. But it doesn't always work out that way, but when it does, it feels pretty good. Now we also have the Markham Marauders. So these were changed in the latest update, so they're now 4/4s with gain vitality for 2 turns. So they're usually a pretty common just 6 for 4, and if you have one on the field when you play the other one, it gets bonded, so you get vitality for 4 turns. Just all around solid 4 provision cards. Of course we have the Markham Volunteers, which are our thinning tools. Pretty common to have a dwarf on the field in this deck, so you shouldn't have any trouble pulling these out. And then we also have Markham Defenders. So these are another alternative target for your Novigradian Justice. So you can play 2 of these and then maybe play Dennis Kramer in the middle of them on the melee row to get them both going immediately. You can hit one with Call of the Forest in a niche situation if you need just some points on the field. You can boost them with Barclay. There's a lot of things you can do. And overall, they do just look scary. Like, opponents will normally just remove them because they're scared of boosting it out of control. So these are solid cards. Cleaver's Muscle is just more of just something there, so if you need something to hit with Novigradian Justice, you just need 10 points, you can do that. It's a dwarf, it's 5 for 5, it's got a shield, just a solid card, nothing crazy, but fits in well here. Next up we've got Barclay, so he's a 4 for 7, and boost an allied unit by 1 for each allied dwarf. So now we're getting into the golds. Barclay is normally probably 9-10 points on average. You've got a lot of dwarves on the field. You don't need many for this guy to be good. He works really well boosting a defender past 4, so he starts boosting. Works well at keeping Zigrin alive. Just overall, normally good point value. Dennis Kramer, like I said, normally works best putting in between 2 Markham defenders, but he also works great if you've got a really big ranged row. Chuck him in the ranged row and you'll boost all units by 1. So again, often a lot of points for 8 provisions. Zoltan is pretty insane in this deck, so again, this whole deck, most of these cards just come down to you have a ton of dwarves, so units that require dwarves are normally very good. So in this case, Zoltan, again, very good. you're often got 3, 4, 5 or more dwarves on the field, so you can normally kill some pretty decent sized units with this guy. He works really well in like a first round situation where you need some really heavy points to stay in the game, or as a late round, even as a finisher. So Zoltan's a great card, and you pretty much never find him to be bricked in my experience. So Paulie here, just another decent dwarf, normally best used just to boost a Mahakam defender or give 2 points. I don't often give a shield to something. There's normally not much you'd give a shield to, maybe a mercenary, but you know, he's just normally a pretty solid 8 for 8, and he's a dwarf. And you know, he looks scary, so that's good. Shouting Sags, obviously a very classic Scoia'tael card. We do run Ithleen, we run 2 Dwarven Agitators, so you can normally get this guy up to 5, 7, 11 points even. Depends on how much boost you want to put into him, but normally, you know, obviously a classic finisher with Scoia'tael, and he's a dwarf, so that's lovely. Gabor Zigrin, again another classic Scoia'tael card, melee for resilience, so you can get a cheeky round 2, get him to carry over round 3, or if you just play him, you get him immunity, and you're pretty much getting, he almost acts as a Milver in this case, because basically every card's a dwarf, so you're basically getting a point with every card. So overall, really good on long rounds, and really good to sneak some extra points across rounds as well. Now we're getting into the really top end, so we've got Call of the Forest. This card was changed in patch 3.2, so it now plays a Scoia'tael unit from your deck and boosts it by 2. So it's basically a royal decree for Scoia'tael units with a bit of a boost on the end. Normally works really well just to pull the Great Oak, just as a really good guarantee for the Great Oak as a finisher. 10 points plus whatever you've got to the left or right as damage or boost is incredibly powerful. So that's often what I use it for. Otherwise you can use it in a pinch just to grab really whatever card you need. Whether that's Ithleen to boost a Sheldon in your hand, whether that's Zoltan to take out some unit, whether that's Zigrin to get resilience, whether it's Dennis Kramer to boost some Markham defenders. It's really just whatever you need it to be, and it's just really helpful. Next up, Karathi Heatwave. So this is a bit of a flex spot. I was previously running Carlo Varese in this spot. In the gameplay footage you'll see after, we are running Carlo. This is a bit of a changed list, this is the only difference, but basically if you're running into a lot of tall units, which I am currently, a lot of Nilfgaard going around right now, you know, hyper thin, reveal, boost kind of stuff, then Karathi Heatwave works really well. You can just banish a 20-point unit or something. You can either choose to run this or Geralt. Personally, I prefer Heatwave just because it allows you to remove stuff that's lower than 9, even though Geralt does give you a few points. But it's really up to you. Carlo Varese is another good choice. Geralt, Heatwave, they'll kind of do the same thing, so it's really just up to you. Ithleen, classic, boost Sheldon, and if you don't have Sheldon, you know, good carryover. So again, classic Scoia'tael card. A lot of classic Scoia'tael cards here, which I guess makes sense, that's why they're classic. Novigradian Justice. Now this card is extremely key. So generally, how I find it anyway is I don't want to play Justice until round 3, or round 2 if I'm pushing. So this is the card that wins you games. So if you've got first say, which is often more important with this deck than having last say, so you actually want to lose round 1, provided you don't get pushed in round 2. With this and Mystic Echo, it can play 4 dwarves in a turn. So that's 4 mercenaries, that's 4 defenders. Those are normally your main 2 targets. So using this to get 4 of those in one turn is crazy. And if you've got first say with mercenaries, you can just win games like that. So I normally mulligan pretty hard for Justice, and I'll keep it. If I have it in round 1, I will hold it throughout the whole game to get it at the end, and only use it if it's very, very, very special circumstances, if we really need it to win that early game. Because we can also use Mystic Echo with Call of the Forest, which isn't bad. We can pull, you know, another powerful unit, but 95% of the time I'm pulling Justice. And lastly, we have the Great Oak. Super powerful card. You're normally going pretty wide with this deck because long rounds are your friend in this case a lot of the time, but what's good is we actually have the power to go short if we need to. But generally you'll be going for longer rounds, so the Great Oak can get massive value. You know, 5 units on board, that's an 8 power unit to deal 5 damage, or boost by 5, or any mixture of the 2. So if you've got, say, 8 units on the field, which happens pretty often, it's a 16 power card. So pretty insane. If you're pulling it with Call of the Forest, that can be like an 18-point finisher, which is just ridiculous. So Great Oak, super key card, really great finisher, and can even be used in early rounds to pull you back if you've fallen a bit far behind. You can get some pretty huge points with this, and it can get you back into the fight without much trouble. So that's kind of the list I've got as advertised. There are a couple of flex spots, like I said, so Karate Heatwave is probably one. I could see changing out maybe Poorly and maybe Cleaver's Muscle if you need to take in, like, I don't know, a Northern Wind or something if your fall test was out of control. But, you know, apart from that, I feel like the list is pretty good. So what we're going to do is jump into a couple of games. So we're going to go for a loss first, and then we're going to go into the win, and I'm going to explain, you know, how we got to these conclusions, why we did, what we could have done better, so you can learn from our mistakes. So without further ado, let's jump into that and see how it goes. Alrighty, here we are. So this is our first game. We're up against an Ardell. Generally not a good matchup for a deck like this. So this does end up being our lost game, but let's play it out. So on the first mulligan, I like to throw back our mercenaries as we don't really want to use them in the early game, and we'll use them later. So we are on the bad coin, so we're probably going to get punished here, and we do, for having these kind of... We have a lot of low tempo plays, right? We've got our agitators, we've got our volunteers, and we are on the receiving end of all this. So if we have low tempo plays, we risk losing on even, which is not good. And this is the one downside with this deck, is that if you do start on this end and you get kind of caught out with a hand that can't necessarily take things back, then you've got a high chance of losing on even. And that's kind of what happens here. So double agitators, a Zoltan we can't really activate, an Ithleen that can't really target anything except just something to boost, Poorly, guards, and a Justice we don't want to use. So it's a bit of a tough spot we're in, so what I try to do here is pull the volunteers, use the boost, and hope he doesn't catch up, but he's got Fire Scorpions, so he obviously does. But we've kind of achieved our goal. We've put some carryover, we've thinned our volunteers, and that's really all we can hope to do. We do chuck Zoltan here, probably not the best play in hindsight. We're going to lose on even most likely anyway, so it probably would have been better to save that card for later. Maybe something like an Ithleen would have worked better to get some carryover. But I was thinking, you know, we don't have Sheldon, so we don't have really good targets, but, you know, an okay target is better than no target, right? So we do end up losing on even 5 and 5, which is not good for us. We could have used Justice too. I just really... Yeah, maybe I should have used it. That's a play you've really got to make as you go along, whether you want to commit using Justice early and not have that big double Justice play later on. But I think even then, we still would have lost on even, so not ideal. So he drops the Hefty Helg, so I'm thinking, alright, he's probably pushing us here. You don't drop a Helg if you're not going to be pushing. So we do throw down Justice and go for 2 Mercenaries. And we do end up using our leader ability too, so we don't want to get pushed. While this deck is good, or can be good, in a short round with cards like the Great Oak and Poorly and maybe Dennis Kramer, it's not going to stand up to an Ardell that can seize our unit and have some, you know, big power cards. But here's the classic Nilfgaard, walked right into it, super locks by Orcs, and now this game's pretty much been sealed. So it's a tough one really, because on the one hand you need to commit, but on the other hand, you know, you've got to be careful about these kind of plays. So even if we'd gone, you know, waited, we would have lost 2, he would have left out another one, and then serrated the other one. So going from a, you know, bad start in round 1 to maybe a couple of misplays early on, to that, there's really no way we were winning this game. So he's pretty much... Ardell is very well kitted to dealing with engine decks and things like this. So we're pretty much just trying to stay alive at this point. We do call the forest the Great Oak into the defender to stop it boosting. I'm thinking, well, we need every point we can get. In the end, it's not really going to matter. Because we're going to get pretty handily beat. But, you know, I guess it's good practice, try and make sure we get everything as efficient as possible. So setting up the biggest row for Dennis Kramer. We could have played the Cleaver's Muscle first to get another point on the Markham Guard. And now I'm like, alright, it's definitely over. We got no removal to deal with Stefan. So there's nothing really much we can do. That's kind of a downside with this deck, apart from the Great Oak and whatever you've got in kind of that big slot. In this case, Calaverese or Heatwave. And then maybe a Sheldon Skaggs. There's not a ton of removal, right? So you can get caught out like this. It's really, you've got to choose well what you want to remove. And I mean, it didn't really matter in the end. You can see he's got a lot more points than we do. But it probably would have been smarter to hold the Oak for something like Stefan. But we get 2-0'd, which is kind of the downside. Alright, so here we are in the next game. We've got a Fran v Fran mirror. Or I should say Mystic Echo, shouldn't I? Something you'll probably run into as, you know, pretty common deck to play right now. So we're going second, so this is different to that first game. So we're a bit let off the hook here, as you could say. So our goal now here in run 1 is really just to set up carryover, thin our volunteers, chuck a few cards we, you know, maybe not necessarily need, like those Markham Marauders. So we can set up for a nice long round 3 later on, with us having first say. So that's something with this deck, is that first say is often more important than last say. So getting out those quad machine gunning Dwarven mercenaries is very, very effective. As is this doing the same with, say, Markham defenders and boosting them. And doing that first can be very important. So we do play one more card here with our Agitator. We probably could have maybe not played that Marauder and just done the Agitator. Yeah, either or. Kind of gets the same outcome, except we have a shorter, or we have less cards for round 2. And we do want to have more cards in round 2 to set up even more carryover with, say, Ziggurin or Athleen. But either way, we kind of get to the same position here. So we lose round 1, which is fine, and now we just have to make sure that if we do get bled, we're ready for it. So we chuck a couple of cards. We kind of need to make sure we have our power cards, right? So we've got Justice, which is very important. We've got Call of the Forest, which is very good. I don't want to risk bricking our Markham, our Dwarven mercenaries, so I don't mulligan anymore. Kind of a weird, perplexing play there. Justice into double Marauder. Not sure quite what they were thinking there. Anyway, so we do the same. I'm not fully convinced they're pushing us yet. Maybe he's just going for some deck thinning. But now he plays Waters of Broccolin, and we know they're pushing. So we gotta get on our ball game here, because if we get, you know, we're a bit cautious about maybe playing some long round engines and kind of wait it out, then there's a pretty good chance that they'll just overwhelm us and we get 2-0'd. So we do go into the Justice. Now I did do a bit of a misclick here. I was never intending to actually play Dennis Kramer in this case, but I should have clicked to the right of that Marauder to have the option to, because now we can't boost both. Because my initial plan here is that, well, they're going to be pushing us. My round 3 is going to be into Marauders, Markham Defenders again, with Dennis Kramer. So anyway, we play Sheldon, we get rid of Pavko. We're now sitting very nicely, just 1 point above our opponent. And I want to make sure that we do stay above on our turn to guarantee that we go card up. Unless we have to commit it at the end. Paulie's nice here, just sets up a boost. Does get locked in the end, but that's okay. So again, just making sure we're staying ahead. We need 6, so Barclay gives us a pretty solid 9 points plus the boost off our defender. So I'm kind of thinking, alright, we should probably save the Great Oak, and I would like to save... I'd pretty much like to save our whole hand except the guards, but with that Barnabas play, we know he's pushing it pretty hard. So we drop the Oak, hitting on one of the Dryads, I believe. Yep. Just to make sure we stay ahead, because that was a pretty big point play. So we're staying ahead, staying a card up. We get locked, pretty low tempo play. So now I go for the sneaky Call of the Forest into Ziggurin. So I'm pretty sure that last card of his isn't going to be any huge removal. It could be the Great Oak, but he'd stay alive, and then we could boost it. It turns out to be the Call of the Forest into the Great Oak. Like I said, often Call of the Forest is just another way to get the Great Oak. So he goes here, damages Ziggurin, and also goes for their leader ability. So I'm kind of hoping to keep Ziggurin on board, and then we can also save our leader ability and have a pretty decisive round 3. But we do end up committing almost everything to make sure we actually catch up. Because, you know, double Call of the Forest, which is what they do end up doing, is no small play. So pulling out in Malayan, doing 10 damage. So now we've got over 20 points to make up. So I'm thinking, alright, we got to try and stay a card up, but also win. Right? So how do we do that? So kind of thinking of plays. I would prefer to save Dennis Kramer for later. We could boost Ziggurin to give him more carryover in the next round. What we end up doing is playing the Markham Guard, and now this is when you see Zoltan provide huge value. We can destroy a unit with 8 power or less, which is anything on his board except for the Great Oak. So we do replay a card, we replay Call of the Forest, Zoltan, 14-point play right there with Ziggurin on board, and we kill the Dryad, and boom. 14 plus the 2 we get from the burst. So not only do we pretty decisively take that round and points by the end of it, very perfectly planned out, we do get Dennis Kramer ready to go. And they eventually just concede, and that's a win. So that's kind of how this game works, how this deck works. You generally want to carry over round 1, get all that kind of out of the way, thin your volunteers in round 1, get that sorted. Round 2, if you don't get bled, then just maybe get a bit more carryover with, say, Ziggurin or Athleen, as much as you can really, so then in round 3 you can really kind of bring it home. Losing round 1 is often the way to go, because starting round 3 is very, very nice when you've got those mercenaries to machine gun away. And if you get bled, don't be afraid to put down some big power cards to kind of make sure you don't fall behind and get 2-0'd. And then you can have a pretty potent short run like we were about to have with Dennis Kramer and a Athleen, Cleaver's Muscle, and a Markham Defender. So that's kind of how this deck works. I hope this guide was helpful, giving you a good idea of kind of where to take this deck yourself and how to play it when you do give it a go. Feel free to read the accompanying written guide, which will go into a bit more depth about general game plans and such like that, if you maybe need a bit more info on how you'd like to run this thing. So best of luck, and we will see you all in the next one.